Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. My name is Bruce Sellery, and I'm the President-elect of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and I want to welcome our viewers who are joining us online over the internet, joining us for the Changing Face of Canadian Agriculture. The Canadian Club is a nonprofit, and we do not receive one dime of government funding. The only way that we can make these events possible is because of the support of our sponsors. So we commend two corporations today for sponsoring this event: EY, represented by Ted Salter, and Scotiabank, represented by Mark Mulrooney. Please join us in thanking them now. Now let me introduce our speaker. Here in this hemisphere, most of us, not everyone, but most of us have enough to eat. Murad Al-Katib envisions a world where everyone has enough to eat, specifically access to safe, affordable, and sustainable food protein. 15 years ago, he left his job, started a business in the basement of his house with a pair of twins just born kicking around upstairs. He acted on his vision, created a business that is now a key global link for lentil producers. As president, CEO, and board member of AGT Food and Ingredients, he's been instrumental in guiding AGT from a small basement startup founded in Saskatchewan to the world's largest lentil, chickpeas, and peas producer. AGT has 45 manufacturing plants, 2,000 employees on 5 continents, and over $1.5 billion in revenues. Its products are shipped to more than 126 countries around the world. Over the past 7 years, it's completed 17 acquisitions, most of them in emerging markets, and as a result, AGT has diversified into areas that include pasta, rice, grains, and various food ingredients. We were hearing at the head table about some of the product development ideas that I'm sure Murad is going to talk a bit about. He is EY's 2017 World Entrepreneur of the Year. The UN Association of Canada has acknowledged him with the distinction of Global Citizen Laureate. The province where AGT is headquartered awarded him an Order of Merit. Murad will speak and then be joined in conversation with our immediate past president, Gillian Riley, president and CEO of Tangerine. And so, Murad, the Canadian Club of Toronto podium is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Very much a pleasure to be here today, escaping the cold in Regina. So I'm going to spend maybe just the next 15 minutes or so giving you a little bit of a kind of a thumbnail sketch of a few views, and then we're going to pick up with Gillian and maybe have a bit of a discussion. And before I get going, I think important to know a little bit of the history, I think. And I am proudly a first-generation Canadian. So my parents immigrated from Turkey in 1965. My father came as a country doctor to a small rural community of 1,200 people in Saskatchewan. And I'm particularly proud he retired last year after 52 years of full-time practice serving rural Saskatchewan. And my mother came in 1966 as a young bride, didn't speak a word of English. In 1976, she was the first woman elected to a rural municipal council in Saskatchewan history. And if you think of that, an immigrant Muslim woman elected to a rural council in 1976. So, that's kind of the foundational element. I mean, we grew up in a household where jobs on Main Street, economic development, in rural communities, and the reliance on agriculture, were certainly prevalent in our household. And I think that's certainly, if I credit back, that passion part of the community economic development, that's been a big foundation of my business. And the other side of that was a recognition, though, that although we were proud Canadians, we were international, and we knew there was a world outside of Canada, and we had to become a part of that. And that was kind of part of the culture that our parents instilled in us. So, went to school in Saskatoon, went to Arizona, did an MBA, and decided I would be in big corporate America like everybody else who leaves. And, then very quickly after, I started to go through what I called the big fish, little fish dilemma. And I started to think, there's this big, sea out there in the world, and I want to be a big fish in that. So, the best thing for me is to come back to Saskatchewan. And so I packed my bags up and I came back to Saskatchewan, and you know, as an entrepreneur, I did what every good entrepreneur does. I went and I joined the government. So, you know, I decided I'd become a government bureaucrat for 6 years. I headed up the Emerging Markets Trade Group in Saskatchewan, and I disrupted the hell out of government for about 6 years, you know, looking at how emerging markets really were the future of our economic prosperity in this country. And then again, I did what every good entrepreneur does. At the age of 28, I was an assistant deputy minister level. My wife was 6 months pregnant with our twins. I quit my job, moved to the basement of my house with a vision to start a lentil company. And when I told Michelle, I remember her looking at me first to say, well, what are lentils? That was the first question. And, you know, the second thing she did is she didn't talk to me for a week. And, you know, that was a good week, actually. So, no, okay. She's watching live, so she'll give me a heck when I get home. But you know, a gentleman who actually spoke, you know, to this club once, Sir Winston Churchill, said, you know, history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. And, you know, when I look at, you know, that opportunity in Saskatchewan and in Canada, the opportunity to go from cereals, oil seeds, and summer fallow, so summer fallow is black soil, right, to a continuous cropping where you could plant a crop that would fix nitrogen in the soil naturally. Lentils, peas, chickpeas, and beans do that. And the vision of us going farm to farm, convincing farmers to grow these crops, took the acreage of lentils, peas, chickpeas, and beans to 11 million acres by 2015. This has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, you know, in this country. 60% of the world's peas are grown in Canada, right? 50% of the world export of lentils are from Canada. And when we look at, you know, sustainable vegetable protein, you know, to produce a pound of lentils is 43 gallons of water. To produce a pound of traditional meat protein is 1,840 gallons of water. So when we look at, you know, the overall opportunity, you know, AGT highlighted the opportunity, and we're trying to scale, and we're trying to use that as a model for Canada. What is the world scarce of today? Land, water, and work ethic. Okay, so when I look at those three things, you know, in our provocative statement, if this is the century of agriculture, you know, Dominic Barton stated in his report, it's a century for agriculture, therefore I conclude it's a century for Canada, right, if we do it right. And so, you know, we have to turn around and we have to look at, you know, the UN FAO. I want to quantify it for you just so that it's not my vision alone. In the next 40 years, we have to produce in the world as much food as we produced in the last 10,000 years of civilization. Now, you know what, as an entrepreneur, you'd think that that would make me, you know, rubbing my hands in glee, right? And it is, but at the same time, when people ask me what keeps me awake at night, that keeps me awake at night. Because when I turn around and I look at the challenge ahead of us with the scarcity in land and water and work ethic, you know, I say, you know, very clearly, when a baby is hungry, they cry. When a 21-year-old man is hungry and unemployed, he protests, right? So civil obedience, right? Civil society, you know, as a nation and as an international community, we focus so much on building institutions, but we haven't focused enough on understanding that the basic building block of civil society is things like clean drinking water and available, affordable food. And so, you know, the vision that I have and that many of us have in this economy is that, you know, Canada will become the first stop, you know, on the protein highway as we link into the Silk Road in Asia. Because when we look at those market dynamics, right, agriculture is not just food anymore. It's touching now, you know, different sectors of our economy. You know, when we look at, you know, renewable fuels in Western Canada, in the future, canola and wheat and pulses will rotate in a sustainable agricultural system to allow us to use wheat for ethanol and canola for biodiesel, right? And it will provide a sustainable return and water management and soil conservation for the farmers as we do it. So when we look at that ability to interact in the different areas of the economy, you know, we understand that it's just not food anymore. We, though, have to capitalize on the market dynamics. Now, you know, we've all heard about the population growth, right? 9.6 billion people by 2040. That's a very important, you know, statistic. And if I look at India, you know, a market that right now is restricting us with tariffs and restrictions, but will open up again, they are growing by over 40 million people a year. So when we look at that, you know, we're growing by more than Canada every year in India. And these crops are what I call cross-income consumption, right? Every income range consumes, right? As you are richer, you consume more. As you are richer, you consume different qualities. But even the subsistence consumer consumes these products on a daily basis, on a non-discretionary basis. So, when we look at fundamental definition of commodity, it's a price taker, right? But when I turn around and look at the opportunity for Canada, it's to grow these commodities, to up their value, and to really capitalize on the other market dynamic that I think is even more important for us as Canadians. Let me give you the quick statistic. By 2030, middle-class spending in Asia is estimated to be $33 trillion. Okay, now we as Canadians are not greedy, self-serving people. We only want $100 billion of that for Canada, okay, and the rest we'll share around, right? But 33 trillion. So, again, I don't make a bold prediction. Canada 10 years from now should be serving a completely different consumer and agriculture than we serve today. Because as we move up value, we're going to be providing refined products, semi-refined products, and food ingredients to the world demand for sustainable vegetable protein, for sustainable crops, and feeding into that scarcity of water and land. So, when we look at that endowment, we have the abundant natural resources. We have the R&D facilities. We have farmers that are world-class. Right? What do we have to look at from our deficit perspective? We are lagging in productivity. Our infrastructure is not keeping up. I spoke at an event of young agricultural entrepreneurs 2 weeks ago, and I made a comment there. I want to make it here, and I want you all to hope to take this away. If we want healthcare and education in this country, we need an economy. Okay, and I think that too often we forget that, and that not in my backyard is not an answer. We need our products to go to market. We need gateways and corridors. We need transportation infrastructure that's properly planned. Can you imagine we're planning a country's infrastructure with our land base and our weather on election cycles, and really half election cycles, right? Because by the time we get halfway through, very little is getting done, right? Australia has a 50-year rolling infrastructure plan. So, these are the type of fundamental changes that, when we turn around and look at that, the opportunity to seize the technology and innovation landscape, is going to be important. Now, we've done some things, I think, that are important. The superclusters, many of you have heard of those. So there is a protein supercluster that happens to be centered out of Saskatchewan. I might have had a little bit to do with that one, maybe. But definitely a very, very important, opportunity. That's going to be a $400 million private sector and government partnership looking at how do we execute what we call total plant utilization, meaning how do you sell protein, how do you sell starch, how do you sell fiber, how do you sell flours, and how do you sell food products, right? That is the big lift. So when I chaired the National Strategy Table on Agriculture for the Government of Canada, we identified very clearly that to move from number 5 in exports to number 2 in exports in agricultural commodities, and to move from 13th in food up to number 6, would have an effect of increasing exports from 45 billion to 85 billion by 2025. Okay, that's real. That's real dollars and cents. And, again, I'm happy to be here representing what you don't think is necessarily that sexy, right? Lentils and agriculture. But you know what? We're very tangible. And the tangible economic benefits of agriculture are accruing. We are the #1 job creator in this country, and it's not well known. So, again, I think that events like this give the opportunity to recognize that that decision I made to quit that job and start that company, was to capitalize on the bright future ahead. Now, before I ask Jillian to come up and join me, I just wanted to make another comment on gateways and corridors. Big part of my life over the last year has also been focused on the Arctic. And the Arctic of Canada is an opportunity. Myself and my partner, Fairfax Financial, we took ownership of the Port of Churchill, Manitoba in 2018. And, give you a few little quick tidbits on that. It's the only rail-served Arctic port in North America. The Northern Passage will become a reality one day. The distance from New Jersey to Shanghai is shortened by 7,400 kilometers over the Arctic. Okay, Arctic sovereignty is a necessary part of North American existence, and economic viability in a Arctic strategy will have to be a part of our country's future development. So I want you to recognize that, we've got Asia-Pacific gateways and Eastern gateways and corridors and North-South corridors, but the Arctic, if we don't do it, Russia and China are doing it. Russia announced in December their intention by 2040 to spend $180 billion on Arctic development. So, again, I want you to think about, the opportunity, as we look at the Arctic Gateway, as another very important element, of the economic development strategy of this country. I think that, when I turn around and I look at, where we sit in agriculture today, that endowment I talked about is good. We've got some barriers, right? Anyone who was here last week heard Mark talk about scale up, right? I mean, we have a critical scale problem in agriculture in almost every sector of our economy, right? We need champions to be able to scale globally. And, with all of that being said, I think that it's a race, right? I'm feeling pretty good about where we stand in our race. We got a good lane, good coach, right? We trained hard, okay? We tested negative for anabolic steroids. We're okay, right? So we're all good. We're clean, right? But we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg yet in terms of what we can do in agriculture in this country. So I'm going to end those kind of introductory comments there and maybe get to some discussion.
I'm going to go here.
All right.
So can you hear me? Yeah, excellent. Good afternoon, and I'm delighted to be here with you, Murad. Murad is like an old friend.
Yes.
I've worked with Murad.
She's my banker. And your bankers are your friends. They're our sponsors, so go ahead. Go ahead.
But we're also friends.
Yes, we are.
And your story that you just shared with us about how you got started in the business and kind of your vision and your dreams is incredibly impressive. And I'm sure lots of people were thinking, wow, that's pretty good. He started in his garage and started in lentils. And so what was the passion that got you to, first of all, someone actually asked this in the card, but I sort of had the same question. Why lentils? And what really prompted you to start up your own business?
Well, I think that there were a couple of things. I mean, again, being kind of analytical, I guess. My background wasn't in agriculture. It's more in finance and accounting. And, looking really at this cropping pattern, right? When I was growing up in Davidson, Saskatchewan, every third field was black dirt, right? Because they had to leave it that way because the canola depleted the nutrients so badly and required so much fertilizer that, the agricultural system required the soil to rest. The alternative to that was to plant the legume. And so, my view was if we could put in place a system where we could receive it, process it, and create value enough to raise the prices and capitalize on that demand that was in emerging markets, then we could scale the acreage. And, people don't believe, but I literally went in my car, farm to farm and region to region, where farmer meetings at the beginning were one farmer at their kitchen table drinking their coffee. And, we were able to scale to millions of acres over time. And so the fundamentals were there. I think that in hindsight, I recognized early on some really important elements. I didn't have any money. That was a problem.
You had your handy bank.
Yeah, I did have my handy bank, exactly. But, I went and found a partner. And I think that, again, if we look at our story, there's another side of it. I mean, we talk a lot about immigration and economic immigration and, all of these things which are high on the minds of Canadians. We're almost a perfect example, a first-generation Canadian partnered with a Turkish family that wasn't my family, who had technology and capital. They sent $1 million of capital, some machinery, and some technicians from the southern port city in Turkey to Regina, Saskatchewan, and we built a lentil factory. And that created 900 Canadian jobs, 2,000 jobs in the world, and almost a couple of $1 billion in sales. So, that ability to scale up, I recognized early on, Jillian, that if I wanted to do it, I needed help. And that's where I started.
So I'm going to go with that a little bit further on the scaling up piece.
Yep.
Mark Wiseman, who many of you know, he spoke here, was it last week at the Canadian Club? He spoke here, and he stood up when it was announced that you were the next speaker at the Canadian Club, and he said that you are one of the few entrepreneurs in Canada who has figured out how to scale up. So what would your advice be for people as someone who has been able to scale up? And I've watched this over many years too. You have really grown exponentially.
Well, I think that early on in my career, I was 28 when I started. I was typically an entrepreneur. I was aggressive. I thought I could change the world. I could take, failing companies and turn them around. And I quickly recognized that that's really, really intensive in terms of effort and risk. So I switched the strategy. I bought successful companies, mostly clients, competitors, right? And then I would take them into our supply chain and I would concentrate them where they were good. And what we took over was the corporate infrastructure, right? We took over the accounting, the finance, the risk management, like everything central, because we're a unhedgeable commodity. So you can't, we're physically handling about, maybe up to 20% of the world trade of lentils in a given year. So you can't have a futures contract to hedge that risk. So you had to centrally manage that risk. But I think the key thing was we retained 15 of 16 management teams of the acquisitions we bought.
That's huge.
And many of those were family companies that sold us 100% of their company. And the generations that were young enough stayed with the company and continue to work with us till today. So, that I think has been something that we've been very successful at, is taking an aggressive international strategy with a Canadian approach. And I think sometimes we're a bit too soft in our approach. I can tell you, there were times where I had to go to a competitor and say, I won't pay your price. And in one case, we even set up and we shared a fence with them because we set up right next door to them. Right? We had to do that because, you just can't, overpay. Yeah. And another thing I learned early on is don't fall in love with any one asset or any one business. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and don't throw good money after bad.
Does it worry you in such a geopolitical uncertainty that we have right now, and trade, I'm going to call it, trade issues that exist across various countries and borders and so on? Does that worry you at all for future, or in the shorter term?
Well, I would certainly say that that agriculture is the most political business in the world. And so when you look at it, again, domestic agricultural policy, protecting farmers and farm lobby in every country in the world is a very, very important political driver. And so from that perspective, what we're seeing today is disturbing because we're putting, decades of free trade, progress at risk. Do I think that it's a long-term, permanent trend? No, I don't. I think that, again, the knowledge and benefits of, free trade are going to be there. I think that, again, the scarcity of land and water is going to allow Canada to become, from a food security perspective, which I think is going to be a big political issue, it's going to actually increase our relevance in the international community. And I think that, that's something that we as a country have to recognize. We are a producer of natural resources. Some of those are renewable, like agriculture. Some of them are non-renewable, like oil and gas and mining. But we are doing it in a fashion that is more sustainable than any other country that's producing similar types and similar technologies. This is a driver of our economy. And I think that it's something we need to celebrate as Canadians, not something that we need to hang our heads about because we produce natural resources. The world needs it.
Yeah, agriculture is certainly the sort of engine of every economy, right? People need to eat.
Well, it is. Listen, fundamentally, that's what I love about the business we're in. We're in clean vegetable protein. When I say lentils and I say non-GM, gluten-free, high in micronutrients naturally, again, I'm bragging, right? That's what I'm doing with those products. And so there's not a lot of downside. But I think that in this country, again, we went through cycles where, agriculture used to be viewed by many Canadians as a sector that needed to be supported. I think agriculture is now being viewed as a sector that's going to drive, part of the economic growth and prosperity of this country. Pretty awesome.
So you said earlier when you got into lentils, your wife wasn't even sure what it was. I've come across that with people who say, remind me what a lentil is. So tell us what kind of foods, you were saying earlier, you're doing hamburgers now with lentils in them.
Yeah.
So tell us what sort of foods lentils forms part of and how important it is as an ingredient.
Yeah, I think that, if we look at, on trend today, right, we're looking at, high protein, high fiber, non-GM, low allergen ingredients. So, if we look at today, 62% of the food products on a store shelf contain corn or a corn derivative. So, very much when we look at what we're doing today, the food companies in the world are looking for no corn, no soy, certain applications where they're looking to eliminate gluten or wheat, and they're wanting to eliminate things like eggs and allergens. So, where we see the future is, in producing foods that, kids want to eat and mums want to buy, right? And that's, kind of it. So,
And all of us need to eat.
well, yeah, and I think that, when we look at high protein, high fiber, those are not fads, right? When we look at that, in the interaction of fiber and protein and calories, and glycemic index, I think that these are all, fundamental blood sugar response. These are all, again, fundamental health trends. And so from that perspective, the Canada Food Guide, I didn't have a hand in that. Well, maybe a little bit.
Somebody asked
Maybe a
about
little.
that in
Okay,
here.
well, we could answer a question on that. But, again, it's fundamentally sound. And we have this ability. These crops only grow in very low moisture, adverse conditions. They're desert crops that originated in Mesopotamia. We're growing lentils in southern Saskatchewan where we have less than 400 millimeters a year of annual rainfall. So this is truly desert agriculture, and it's very, very efficient.
I'm going to switch gears for a minute. Sure. You're very humble. You've won several awards for what you do in the philanthropic side of things. And you do a lot of work with the Red Cross, and you give a lot of food to developing countries who are in need of food supply. So maybe I'm just going to ask you to talk a little bit about the philanthropic side of what you've...
Yeah, we had a great event yesterday. The Tent Foundation, a guy named Hamdi Ulukaya from Chobani Yogurt was here, and myself and Maple Leaf and Starbucks and a number of companies, made commitments to refugee, programs.
And refugees, yes.
Exactly, and one of the things that we're able to do is, our products are really staple foods that are required. In particular, the Syrian refugee crisis. In 2015, we recognized the need. We have factories in Turkey that were 4 hours from the refugee camps. And, we went to the United Nations and the International Red Cross, Red Crescent, and other NGOs, and we pitched them on a food parcel concept where we could distribute food parcels instead of individual items for emergency response. And in 2016, we did over 700 million refugee meals. So we were taking, lentils and durum wheat and peas from Western Canada, transporting them by vessel from Thunder Bay to Turkey, packaging them into boxes, and creating economic opportunities for Canadians while we were making a dramatic impact on refugee response, in a country like Syria. And, that's the kind of thing that, we did it, and I don't want you to confuse philanthropy with business. And by the way, again, when I won the EY World Award, I said on the stage there is no such thing as social entrepreneurs. There are only entrepreneurs who recognize that social conscience has to be a fabric of your strategy, or you won't be relevant in the future, right? So that's really it. So, this kind of refugee program thing, we've got a lot of press around it and stuff, but to us, not only is it the right thing to do, but we make money doing it.
Right.
And I think that that's a really important thing, and I struggled with it as an entrepreneur. When I won the Oslo Business for Peace Foundation Award, Elon Musk and I won the award, and Elon's talking about electricity. I'm thinking about food and refugees and feeling guilty, right? But on the other hand, then, it really just dawned on me, they were talking about what they called business worthy. And if we as entrepreneurs can deploy that action and make a profit while we're solving a societal problem, then all of a sudden no shareholder will ever question that, and it becomes a sustainable economic pursuit as a part of our strategy. It's not just a social, philanthropic initiative. And that's where I think we got to go.
Well said. Okay, I'm going to end with this question because it's a bit of a personal one for me. I'm now running a technology bank, the largest digital bank in Canada. I think technology is really advancing the world in so many ways, digital analytics, AI, and I'm seeing so much more of it now and understanding it. How does it impact the ag sector?
Oh, listen, agriculture.
that could be a whole nother
but
session.
let me give you a quick one. But agriculture 2.0, right, for Canada, the next 20 years is going to be one where we're going to see massive, change. Where artificial intelligence, machine learning, the ability to utilize, drone technology. I mean, today we are still measuring plots in the field to estimate yield. We will have drones flying every single acre,
Wow.
Of this country in very short order. We will have predictive analytics predicting the output so that we can optimize supply chains, so that rail issues don't become an issue in the future and gateways and corridors can be built. Right? When we look at artificial intelligence in our food business, it's being used to do incredibly high velocity sampling to optimize pH levels and protein isolation so that you can get the most pure and functional protein. These are the ways that agriculture is going to be transformed by technology.
I know, I agree. I completely agree. And I think that I saw a lot of heads nodding as you were saying that. And it obviously has a lot of attention for people because it's still unclear how the technology thing is going to unfold. Somebody asked in the card, and maybe you can just leave us this very quickly. What is your favorite lentil recipe?
My favorite lentil.
They could make it over the weekend.
Yeah,
it may not
I
be
think
very good weather.
it's on our website, and if it's not, we'll get it to you. But my wife Michelle's lentil chocolate chip cookies.
There you go. Enjoy. Thank you, Murad. That was a fantastic discussion.
Great.
So stay. He's going to do a little.
Lentil chocolate chip cookies. Are they super moist? Is that the magic?
They
Moist
are.
and amazing.
High protein, high fiber.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Jillian, thank you for bringing the Q&A to life. We really appreciate that. Great to have you back on our podium. And Murad, thank you for providing such compelling context on both the risks that we face in terms of our disaffected youth and food security and feeding the world, but also for the opportunities. This notion of land, water, and work ethic, the Arctic development, which of course we know we need to think about, but we haven't been, the refugee response, and drones flying across Canada assessing fields. Awesome, awesome. Thank you very much to you both. We really appreciate it. All right, a couple of notes about upcoming events at the Canadian Club. As soon as you leave, you can head back to your device and buy tickets for February 20th. The club is going to host two CEOs. You may have heard of them. Dave McKay, President and CEO of RBC, and Al Monaco.
Mackay.
I'm sorry. I need a pronouncer in my... and Al Monaco, President and CEO of Enbridge, pronounced Monaco. Yeah, like the place in Monte Carlo. Yeah. Good.
The Royal Bank is probably here, that's why.
Yes, they are. We'll just put that up on YouTube. I have made one or two errors in my past. So the focus will be on Canada's energy future. And March 4th, we're going to focus on shareholder activism. We have a number of panelists, Ben Axler from Spruce Point, Patricia Oliasker from Davies, and Dave Salmon from Lauren Hill, talking about what's next in the realm of shareholder activism. A final thanks to EY and to Scotiabank for sponsoring, and a thank you to mediaevents.ca, Canada's online event space, and also VVC for live streaming today's event. Stick around, chat a little bit, eat those dessert trays, and thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it.